welcome everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome you today to this session. This is a very exciting discussion that we're about to have on eliminating the existential threat of nuclear weapons. My name is Dr. Ruth Mitchell. I'm a neurosurgeon and I currently live and work on unceded Coast Salish territory in Vancouver, Canada. I am the chair of the board of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, and we have the great pleasure of sponsoring this event and hosting today with our partners, the International Council of Nurses, the International Federation of Medical Students Associations, the World Federation of Public Health Associations, and the World Medical Association. So to give you an overview of our agenda, today I'm going to delay almost not at all in handing over to our wonderful panelists. First, we'll hear from Izumi Nakamitsu, who's the Undersecretary General and United Nations High Representative for Disarmament Affairs. That will be followed by a pre-recorded message from Peter Maurer, who is the President of the International Committee for the Red Cross. And then we will hear from Shekhar Mehta, the President of Rotary International. And during our introductory, those remarks from our three speakers, we have disabled our chat function so we can focus entirely on these wonderful presentations. We'll then have a question and answer session. And during that time, the chat will be available so that you can post your comments and questions as well. So without further ado, it's my absolute pleasure and delight to hand over to Izumi Nakamitsu. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. And President Mehta, President Maurer, and of course, Vice President Carbonnier, Dr. Mitchell, dear Rotarians and ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for this opportunity. In particular, as a former Rotary scholar, I am so honored to be at this event. I would like to begin with a quote. On August 6, 1945, it was a beautiful morning. At 8:15 a.m., after my father and my sister already left for work, one nuclear bomb was dropped on us. And instantly, thousands of people were incinerated and the rest were seriously burned and injured. The city turned into a hell. In 3 sentences, Hiroshi Isso, a citizen of Hiroshima, bluntly describes the destruction of his city by a nuclear weapon. That day in Hiroshima, and of course 2 days later in Nagasaki, buildings were eviscerated, corpses littered public spaces, and streets ran with rivers of blood. For decades after the atomic bombings, families beyond count suffered the dire human health ramifications of nuclear fallout. These are the catastrophic consequences of the use of nuclear weapons. Now, it is said that it is a curse to live in interesting times, and we live in very interesting times. Our world faces multiple global challenges, from, of course, climate change to ensuring equitable and sustainable development for all, to the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, that continues to ravage communities across the globe. Yet the dangers posed by the continued existence of nuclear weapons must rank amongst the most urgent of these challenges. This is for one simple reason. Nuclear weapons remain the only weapon with the potential to eliminate all life on the planet. As UN Secretary General Guterres said, humanity has acquired the power to bring about its own extinction. And we have come perilously close to unleashing that power on multiple occasions. The 14,000 nuclear weapons in arsenals today are almost all vastly more powerful than the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It has been estimated that a so-called limited nuclear war could create a global famine, resulting in the death of hundreds of millions. And any use of nuclear weapons would unleash a humanitarian catastrophe to which no country could adequately respond. And the death and destruction of a nuclear detonation will linger far longer and the sounds it would take to annihilate thousands. Yet despite knowing all of these, the possession of nuclear weapons persists. I am therefore grateful to the International Physicians for Prevention of Nuclear War and its partners, as well as the international community of the Red Cross, and to, of course, Rotary International for arranging this event. It is an opportunity to have an honest conversation about nuclear weapons and their role in today's world, to talk about why they no longer inspire the society-wide terror they induced during the Cold War in the age of duck and cover and fallout shelters, because they should. I did not come here today to lecture you or unnecessarily scare you. I just simply want to remind this diverse audience that the dangers posed by nuclear weapons are very real and not receding. Through a combination of luck and the judgment of brave men and women, we have not seen another use of nuclear weapons. But we cannot rely on luck and bravery forever. The COVID pandemic has taught us that seemingly low probability events can actually occur with little warning, but with catastrophic global effect. The nuclear terror of the Cold War saw millions marching in protest. The close calls in Cuba and elsewhere produced hard-won lessons, including the shared understanding, as articulated by President Reagan and General Secretary Gorbachev, that a nuclear war cannot be won and must not be fought. Humanity reached common agreement on the need for a world free of nuclear weapons. Following the Cold War's end, we made great strides towards this goal. Nuclear arsenals were drastically reduced, up to 80% in some cases. And global repugnance against nuclear testing is deeply embedded. Regions in the world pronounce themselves as being free of nuclear weapons. Yet, the end of the Cold War seemingly endowed the world with one very dangerous falsehood, that the threat of nuclear war was a thing of the past. And nothing could be more wrong. As Secretary General Guterres said just a few days ago, these weapons are not yesterday's problem, they remain today's threat. Today, the great gains of the past 30 years are being reversed. Relationships between countries that possess nuclear weapons are increasingly antagonistic. They are engaged in an arms race to improve the stealth, speed, and accuracy of nuclear weapons. Dangerous rhetoric about the usability of nuclear weapons is being heard for the first time since the 1980s. Transparency and dialogue are absent. Military competition is prioritized over diplomacy and multilateral cooperation. So for the first time in nearly 40 years, we may see an expansion in the total number of nuclear weapons. And today's risks are complicated. This is no longer the two-horse race of the Cold War. There are more players and regional nuclear crises. The nexus between emerging technologies, new domains in cyber and also outer space, and nuclear weapons has exposed new dangerous vulnerabilities. It is a fluid international environment where guardrails have either been eroded or are completely absent. The risk of a nuclear weapon is being used, most likely due to misperception or miscalculation, is as high as it has ever been. We are drifting towards confrontation, and the chance of escalation beyond the nuclear threshold is far too real. So such a laundry list of risk poses one obvious question: what can be done? I believe this event, we have a unique combination of passion, commitment, expertise, and perhaps most important, reach. it is time to leverage these advantages in confluence to get the world back on the road to its shared goal of the elimination of nuclear weapons. A first step is to work together to broaden what I have attempted today, to remind our neighbors, colleagues, friends, and social media followers that the threat posed by nuclear weapons is growing. We need to remind them that a nuclear war will affect us all, no matter where we live or what side of the political fence we find ourselves on. And we need to encourage them to listen to the experts, to understand the gravity of what is at stake. We need to remind ourselves that arms control and disarmament are not utopian ideals, but have always been real tools of security. And above all, we need people to act, to raise their voices in support of common sense, really, and a safer and more secure world. Around the same time as the birth of nuclear weapons, the United Nations was founded. As the preamble states, it was established by we the peoples to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Now, 3/4 of a century is far too long to have dwarfed in the shadow of the mushroom cloud. It is time for we the peoples to take action to prevent any use of nuclear weapons and to bring about their complete elimination. And of course, the United Nations stands ready to help and work with we the peoples however it can. I thank you so much for your attention. Back to you, Ruth.
Thank you so much. Izumi, you have been just so instrumental in reminding us here that nuclear weapons are a real and present danger, not yesterday's news, and it's urgent business for all of us, for we the peoples. Thank you so much. It's now my pleasure to introduce Peter Maurer, the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross, who has pre-recorded a message for us, which we will now be able to watch. Thank you. Do we have that recording at the ready?
Yes, 1 second.
Thank you. Just a moment, everyone. Thank you for your patience.
Good morning, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War for inviting me to speak at this important event. I'm grateful to Rotary, a global network that unites communities of various backgrounds, and to President Mr. Shekhar Mehta for your engagement on this pressing matter. The International Committee of the Red Cross has been calling for the prohibition and elimination of nuclear weapons ever since the horrific explosions in 1945 in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Their unique destructive power, their uncontrollable radioactive fallout, and the unspeakable human suffering they cause make nuclear weapons one of the most terrifying weapons ever invented. It is extremely doubtful that they could ever be used in line with international humanitarian law, the body of law that regulates conduct in armed conflict. Accepting nuclear weapons as an inevitable part of the international security architecture or as a useful tool for deterrence is an indefensible and dangerous logic. Their catastrophic humanitarian consequences make nuclear weapons a key source of insecurity for humanity as a whole. A nuclear blast in a city would cause immediate death and horrific injuries to thousands of people. Many of those who survived would die from radiation exposure days, months, or years later. No government or aid organization could provide adequate humanitarian response to such a catastrophe, especially if medical infrastructure and services were destroyed. A nuclear war would also endanger the Earth ecosystem and reduce global temperatures, thereby causing long-term damage to our planet. Indeed, the potential use of nuclear weapons threatens the very survival of humankind. Ladies and gentlemen, the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons on 22 January this year was nothing short of a victory for humanity. It is the first universal legally binding instrument to prohibit the use, threat of use, development, testing, and stockpiling of nuclear weapons with a view to their elimination. This historic moment would not have been realized without the tireless efforts and contribution of the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement and of civil society. Together, we brought to the fore the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, driving the international community to view them through the lens of humanity and international humanitarian law. The crucial role of civil society in the development and implementation of law and policy at the national, regional, and multinational level is indeed one of the major characteristics of contemporary humanitarian disarmament. To mention a few examples, the Anti-Personnel Landmine Convention and Convention on Cluster Munitions were in large part the result of ICRC and civil society efforts. Similarly, the landmark UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on Women, Peace and Security in 2000 was the fruit of the advocacy efforts of a coalition of 6 non-governmental organizations. Today, civil society is a key player in global governance. Not too long ago, this was perhaps utopian for many. The same is true for a world free of nuclear weapons. While we are not there yet, we have to believe that this is an achievable goal. The entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was a major step in this direction. The next stop is nuclear disarmament. There are still more than 13,000 nuclear weapons in the world today, many of which are ready to be launched at a moment's notice. The power of many of these warheads is far greater than those dropped in 1945. Nuclear-armed states are modernizing their arsenals, which are at the same time becoming more vulnerable to cyber attacks. Against this backdrop, the risk of a deliberate or accidental nuclear detonation is unacceptably high. The total elimination of nuclear weapons is therefore an urgent humanitarian imperative. The ICRC's participation in today's event is part of this effort. Together, we can boost our call for the broadest possible adherence to the TPNW and for its universalization. We urge states that possess nuclear weapons and their allies to urgently take nuclear risk reduction measures and to implement their obligations and commitments under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. This includes taking nuclear weapons off high alert status and reducing their role in military doctrines, pending their total elimination. 2 important milestones lie ahead of us: the 10th Review Conference of the NPT early next year, and the first meeting of states parties to the TPNW in spring. Both are crucial opportunities to achieve tangible progress towards nuclear disarmament and to take concrete measures to redress the harm done by nuclear weapons use and testing on people and on the environment. Guided by the testimonies of the atomic bombing survivors, the Hibakusha, whose courage and determination made the TPNW a reality, states must never lose sight of the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons and of the humanitarian, legal, and moral imperative to abolish them once and for all. The ICRC, together with our movement partners, will spare no effort until the goal of nuclear weapon-free world is achieved. I wish you a very successful and fruitful discussion, and I thank you.
Thank you so much, President Maurer and the entire International Committee for the Red Cross, for your leadership in highlighting the catastrophic humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons. As you point out, the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is an example of what can be achieved when we work together. And it is in that spirit that we're so excited to welcome Shekhar Mehta, the President of Rotary International, to join us now and share with us. President Mehta.
Hello, friends. It is indeed my pleasure to address you today. Nuclear disarmament is an issue that affects all of humanity. While I may not have been there at Hiroshima on that day, but 10 years back, I had been to Hiroshima at Ground Zero, and I went to the museum there, and I could understand and see what a horrific thing had happened. One has to see that museum to understand what nuclear arms can do to humanity. And so I appreciate everything that all of us are doing to raise awareness about this existential threat. As president of Rotary International, I want to make it clear that our organization recognizes the importance of all issues related to peace and understands that some of our members feel very strongly about this particular one. It is important that Rotarians have taken to create awareness, raise awareness about this. Rotary International has, since its inception, been a champion of peace. Rotarians were at the table when the UN Charter was drafted, and our organization and the services that it presents through its various programs are all directed towards positive peace. Whether it is our Peace Centers program, where each year outstanding people come out trained to stop conflict in the world, and it also comes out with wonderful people like Madam Nakamitsu, who has been a scholar of the work of Rotary's programs. So look what positive peace can do. And this is one person. We now have an army of 1,500 such people, and each year more than 100 are joining this army. Add to that the wonderful programs that we do, which act totally towards peace, whether bringing water to people who are starved for water or educating the young generation so that they understand these problems, these gravest problems to humanity. And of course, that one unique program of eradicating polio, that one program itself has saved 19 million children, nearly the people who died in the First World War. So if only all of this money that is being spent on nuclear arms was directed towards these wonderful positive peace issues, what a wonderful world we could have. Nuclear weapons present a unique challenge, not only because of their destructive potential, but because of the social and political complexity of their existence as a deterrent rather than as a weapon that is to be deployed under any circumstances of war. Political and social pressure does work, and it has worked to limit the future acquisition of nuclear weapons by other states. And so it's very important that such discourses keep happening. It also underscores the need for existing nuclear powers to decrease their arsenal and make them as safe as possible, with the end goal of eliminating them entirely. As you mentioned, Madam Izumi, the position was articulated so very well by the US President Ronald Reagan and Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev 35 years back, and it remains valid even today. Rotary International is a global organization, and that draws its members from every corner of the world. Our diversity is something we both embrace and celebrate. And we choose to respect that diversity by being neutral on issues that may create divergent and potential opposing views within the organization itself. By being neutral, we can continue the internal conversation between our members. But my personal opinion is that Rotary leaders should begin the hard work of convincing fellow Rotarians before others that there is no cause for disagreement when it comes to nuclear weapons, that we can take stronger positions for disarmament while remaining non-political in our approach, as the organization like the International Red Cross have already done. However, we are not there yet, and I appreciate that this may be at times frustrating to accept. Nonetheless, we believe strongly in our non-political stance, not just because it creates and maintains that welcoming and supporting atmosphere that all Rotary members enjoy, but also very importantly, because it ensures that we remain a trusted and respected broker in these and other sensitive conversations and debates in a society as a whole. It is important that we be respected as arbiters and good arbiters. Although Rotary's position on nuclear disarmament is non-political in nature, it is because of that very position that our presence at the discussion table carries weight, and reasonably good weight. Even with this official organization position to retain our neutrality, there is so much Rotarians can do. We fully encourage our members to get involved in the efforts to raise awareness and to inform fellow Rotarians of the scientific facts of the in support of nuclear disarmament. It's very important that people understand the issues. At times, there are large number of people who do not even understand the ramifications. The more Rotarians know, the closer they will come to putting their weight behind this organization so that we can reach our goal of disarmament. I once again wish to thank you for inviting me to this event and for granting me this opportunity to share Rotary's perspective. We are strong believers in peace, and we are sure when all of us come together, there will be peace. Most of all, I want to thank you for your continued passion, all of the people who are present at this webinar today. I wish each and every one of us the greatest success and hope that all our children and grandchildren can someday sleep peacefully in a world free of nuclear threats. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you so much, President Mehta and Rotary International, for all of your work for peace around the world. And as a doctor, I can't help but reflect, what a waste of money these nuclear weapons are, and what an excellent example you show of how that money could be better used, eradicating disease. So now we come to the time where we're going to get to ask our wonderful esteemed panelists a number of questions. And for our question and answer session, we're joined by Gilles Carbonnier, the Vice President of the ICRC, along with President Mehta and Izumi Nakamitsu. And so thank you so much all for being here to answer the questions that I know are pressing on people's minds. So to start with, I have a question for everyone. And you can take turns answering as you wish, but given the enormity of the danger that you have described, it is especially disturbing that leaders, the media, and the public in general do not seem to be paying significant attention to this issue. Now, how do you propose that we can change that? Perhaps, Izumi, we'll start with you. We just need you to unmute, Izumi.
Yes, sorry.
Perfect, thank you.
Yes, no, thank you very much for that very important question. I think raising awareness and of course interest is critical. And there are two things important for that. I mean, the first is of course getting the message right. And of course, the second, in order for us to be able to start changing the situation, we need to make sure that we deliver the message through the right channels. Now, on the message, I think it's very clear. You know, it's a very dangerous time that we're living in, and of course the catastrophic consequences. But of course, you know, with all these other global challenges, it is becoming a very crowded field in terms of catching people's attention. What we need to do, in our view, is of course that nuclear weapon issues are one of the two existential threats, along with, of course, the climate change, and we need to make sure that existential part is clearly understood. You know, we have to continue to, you know, stress the horrific consequences. But as I mentioned a little bit in my initial remark, I think we need to make sure that people understand security cannot be ensured only by military. And in fact, disarmament has always been an important tool for security. And I emphasize this simply because I hear all these arguments, but the threats are increasing, the security situation is deteriorating. This is not a time for disarmament. But my message is that it's precisely because of that, disarmament really is important, because it helps to increase our security. And all of these, I think, comes down to education. We need to make sure that people are, you know, fed with accurate information, and understanding will be increased through that. And also to reframe the debate away from a technical jargon. And then, you know, this gets to the hearts of people in terms of, you know, what they really have to take an ownership. So that, I think, will be a very important start. And for that, I think we need to use the evidence and data that we have, you know, the number of these weapons, their power, and the catastrophic consequences, all of that. But of course, as you said, Ruth, the amount of money being spent on these, and of course the historical you know, facts about you know, near use of this weapon. We have prevented, luckily, you know, some of those near misses being a real use of nuclear weapons. But I mean, all these things have to be really you know, emphasized so that people understand it, and then from there we can start to discuss how we will be able to start our actions at you know, each and every corner of the globe. My final word, the reason why I think today's event is so important is that, you know, in a time of so much information from perhaps not so trusted sources, Rotary clubs, I know they exist throughout the world in you know, all sorts of cities and all sorts of people participating in it. And therefore, it is one of the most trusted sources of information, and also trusted places for people to come together and discuss. So I think those are the initial but extremely important step for us to start changing the current situation.
Fantastic, thank you. I completely agree. I think reframing this as something we do for security instead of undermining security is critically important. And I'm so grateful that we have the entire network of Rotary who are coming online to be part of this this journey with us. Vice President Carbonnier, what say you? How do we increase attention to this important issue in the general public?
Well, Ruth, I think there are several ways we can do that, and I'd like just to mention three. But first of all, I would just like to echo what Peter Maurer said in terms of commending you, all the organizers, for this initiative, and say that Peter Maurer unfortunately cannot be with us, but I'm very glad to join you and together with President Mehta and Under Secretary General Nakamitsu for this very important conversation. So what can we do? I think first, to give concrete ways, it's important to keep the memory of the survivors of Hiroshima and alive. And really, I think when we look at what the Hibakusha went through and when they share their experience and suffering, but also the courage and the determination they have shown since then, I think this has been major drivers towards the discussion on nuclear disarmament today. And if you allow a personal testimony here, I had the chance to work and travel in Japan back as a student in the 1980s. And in Hiroshima, I was invited by a hibakusha to stay at her place with her family. And she told me with the incredible humility about what she went through in August 1945, as she was 8. And she also told me that 10 years later, well, she could go to the US for reconstructive surgery, and how she then sought to go about with her life. And with hindsight, I think that this really forged my own perspective on nuclear weapons. And I could share 2 years ago this perspective with my own children when we visited Hiroshima and the memorial, as you, Shekhar, you did very, very recently. And I think engaging, and this is the second thing we can do, engaging youth is key. And it's rejoicing to see that youth is probably more aware than we might think. We did a recent survey with the ICRC called on Millennials at War. And we interviewed 16,000 millennials in 16 countries. And a majority of them are very concerned that a nuclear attack is likely to occur in the next decade. And what is more, 84% of them think that using nuclear weapon can never be an acceptable option. So I think we see this mobilization, but we need to get them even more engaged. And thirdly, I think we can conduct a bit more research on some open questions to really highlight the disproportionate impact of nuclear weapons and nuclear radiation on women and girls, on the long-term and the intergenerational impact of nuclear weapons, and finally, the impact of nuclear tests on affected communities. So of course, we, international organizations, NGOs, we have a key role to play, but of course, states have a major responsibility. And as Peter Maurer mentioned, but also others, we have very important milestones in the coming months with the review conference of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty that must come into force, and the urgent risk reduction measures that must be taken. And of course, the implementation of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. But as you mentioned, Ruth, more awareness of the general public is key so that states move ahead.
Thank you so much. Yes, and I'm particularly grateful for your emphasis on the youth and recognizing that they have an awareness that we might not always recognize. Within our own movement, we know the strength of our medical student work is one of our richest, greatest strengths, and we're particularly proud to be partnering with the IFMSA for this event today. So I very much share your views that our answers are in front of us and amongst us, but we have to listen and engage in ways that we perhaps haven't done very well in the past. President Mehta, now over to you. How do you think we can get the general public to pay more attention to this critical issue?
So the answer lies in the question itself. We need to get to the public. It's extremely important. And I think the earlier in life they start learning about peace, faith, hope, tolerance, it's better for humanity. Young children need to start believing that war is not fruitful, that people need to understand each other, that people are different and they have to be tolerant to each other. And the earlier they start learning it, the better it is. Rotary fortunately works with tens of thousands of schools across the globe because we have interact clubs in schools. Apart from that, we work with young people. We have a youth wing where we have a few 100,000 members. And when you tell a story to a person, you tell it to a family. So that number is multiplied. It's important that we share with them not only the goodness of peace, but also tell them and show them, if possible, the horrific stories of a nuclear blast. While I was able to go, and Giles, you and Nakamitsu have been able to go and see that museum, but those visuals need to be shared with younger people to understand what harm it can do to humanity. It's unbelievable. I mean, people became like candles there. They just dropped, their bodies dropped like this. So I think it's very important that we show them the horrific side of it and also tell them this can be avoided by peace. Once they start understanding the concept of peace, if I start believing in peace, and I come from the country where Gandhi had come from, he believed so much in peace and non-violence that he could ultimately reach there. And I'm sure when young people, and youth has tremendous power. If they start understanding that this is something that is extremely important for the future of mankind itself, I think we would have made a big difference.
Thank you. I'm reminded that when we hear the message from the witnesses of the actual use of nuclear weapons from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the one thing that we all must agree on is that nuclear weapons can never be used again. So how do we work together to bring that about? I think we'll now get to turn our attention to Shekhar, the ICRC Vice President. Mr. Vice President, we know that the ICRC is a non-political, neutral, and impartial organization. Does this unique identity of the ICRC pose challenges in advocating for the ratification of the TPNW and other measures to eliminate nuclear weapons? How do you manage that? Please unmute. Thank you.
That's really a great question, and I would argue actually that this non-political identity is actually an opportunity, because yes, it's true that the debate on nuclear weapon has always been highly politicized, and for long it's been dominated by geopolitics, by national, regional security arguments under nuclear deterrence theories. And I think that one of the most significant contributions that the ICRC, together with the international movement of the Red Cross and Red Crescent, we have been able to do is to shift the focus on humanitarian and legal aspects, in particular on the catastrophic consequences of the use of nuclear weapon, and the very serious doubt, as Peter Maurer just said, that they could ever be used in a manner that is compatible with international humanitarian law, with the Geneva Conventions. So I believe that the specific identity of the ICRC as a neutral, impartial, independent organization, fundamentally non-political, can be instrumental and has proven instrumental in advocating credibly for the elimination of nuclear weapons. I think that being able to work as a frontline humanitarian organization in conflict, in affected countries, starting with our doctors who came to Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August, September 1945, has granted us with a duty to help bring the voice of affected people to the fore. Now today, with the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, a very important step has been taken, but this is not enough, and it's just a start. I think that together with all partners, some of whom are here today, we will keep raising the awareness of the very serious risks of nuclear weapon use today and the catastrophic humanitarian consequences, as well as their incompatibility with international law.
Thank you. I think your organization shows a sterling example of how to leverage the respect and trust that you have around the world to move forward in this important way. I now have a question for President Mehta. We know that the Rotary Foundation has decided it will avoid investing in companies that derive significant revenue from producing, distributing military weapon systems, cluster munitions, anti-personnel mines, and nuclear explosives. So what I'm wondering is, if we build on the amazing success of your campaign to eradicate polio, what other steps can we take? What can we learn from the polio journey to help in the effort to eliminate nuclear weapons?
Advocacy, advocacy, advocacy. That's what we had to do for polio. Imagine polio has gone from the US for decades, yet US was at the forefront when it came to eradication of polio worldwide. So politically, at times, there are many issues which the politicians do not like. For example, why would somebody in India now care for polio? Because it's gone for 10 years. They would be more interested in other pressing diseases which are killing people. But it was Rotary's efforts that it had to be kept on the front burner and not put on the back burner. I think that's the most important thing that we can do. As civil society, our biggest job would be, at times you and I cannot just stop wars, but we can definitely advocate that wars are not the right thing to do. And I think that would be our best bet. Advocacy, creating awareness, creating a groundswell where people, as we mentioned earlier, it's so very important that young people, more and more people start believing that, no, this is not something that we want to live in the future for. I feel it's important for people. There is no better time than today to understand that all of humanity rather come together to do something positive and something productive and fight against a bigger enemy, which, for example, right now is COVID, or tomorrow maybe climate change. Why tomorrow? Even today it is. I think it's so very important that rather than investing money here, so all of this will have to be told, retold, and retold till we reach our goal.
I'm so grateful you used that word groundswell. It reminds me of the words of the wonderful late Bill Williams, who at the very beginning of the campaign that is now ICANN, said what we needed globally was a groundswell of public opposition to these weapons. And it just absolutely thrills me. And I know that his memory lives on when I hear that word groundswell. And I'm so pleased to hear Rotary coming to the table of helping to create and invest in that groundswell. Your international network is invaluable to this work, and it will allow us to do what we need to do, which is to eradicate nuclear weapons, which the WHO has described as the greatest immediate threat to the health and welfare of humankind. So I now look to turn my attention to Izumi and ask, so what is it that you think that we can do to actualize the commitment by those states who actually possess nuclear weapons to achieve the total elimination of their nuclear arsenals? In some ways, the hardest question of all.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I really want to support President Mehta's words, advocacy, advocacy, advocacy. Let's advocate. Because this sustained political pressure, if you will, our voices are sustained, sustainably given to all governments really do matter. And then it has actually made difference in the past, as Peter Maurer also pointed out. But this said, I think, we also need to make sure that we have practical arguments as well. And those practical arguments are, of course, political and security arguments. Nuclear weapons are very expensive, and they threatened nuclear weapon possessing states as much as their intended targets, right? So these are hard facts, perhaps often overlooked by some of those states that rely their security doctrines on nuclear weapons. So I think we need to make those practical arguments as well. Now, this said, I'm sure you will agree with me, Ruth, also, that we don't believe that nuclear disarmament is something that can happen overnight. And so we need to also take one step at a time, something that could be actually changed. And that's why we have opportunities such as the review conference of NPT, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and of course, next year, the first meeting of states treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. At NPT, I think it will be a really important opportunity to start coming up with some real agreements on how to reduce the risk of nuclear war in a very practical sense. And there are many things that we can do. States that have nuclear weapons really have to look at how to reduce the reliance on nuclear weapons in terms of their security strategies. What are the kinds of risk communication. How can they increase the transparency about their nuclear doctrines? All these very practical, pragmatic issues will, of course, pending, as Peter Maurer said, pending elimination of nuclear weapons. These measures will increase our collective security. That includes, of course, the security of nuclear weapon states as well. So let's, whilst we talk about elimination, how to go about it, let's demand in each and every country to come up with the real practical measures to reduce the chances or the risk of nuclear weapons actually being used. And I think as a starting point, it is very important. And as I said, there will be a practical opportunity that is coming up in the beginning of next year when those states meet in New York to discuss how the past commitments have been fulfilled and how to go about further commitments being made. My emphasis goes, therefore, that those nuclear weapon states that have made commitment to various measures, they have agreed on many wonderful things, only that they have to actually implement them. So for us to be able to move the governments, our consistent, really sustained efforts in terms of our voices being heard will be absolutely necessary. And a TPNW States Parties Conference in March next year will again be an important place in raising awareness about the consequences of nuclear weapons and the possible ways to actually reduce that consequences being actualized. So let's take advantage of those opportunities. I would like to end this remark by something also a little bit positive. Let's take some of the recent positive steps as a momentum. Positive, I mean, the largest nuclear weapon states, the United States and the Russian Federation, are now engaged on the regular basis, almost on a monthly basis, to have actual, very practical discussions in Geneva. And that seemed to be continuing, and they seem to be both very serious about these talks. So we need to turn this very important first step into a greater momentum. And for that, we need the voices from all sorts of civil society actors and citizens themselves to push for that.
Well, that's a really helpful segue into what I'd like to ask you next. So we know that all of our collective efforts as international organizations, myself thinking through the medical lens, all the things we do to improve health, strengthen communities, and eradicate disease will be instantly wiped out if nuclear weapons are used. So my question for each of you is, and perhaps we can start with President Mehta, what can ordinary citizens do to support this effort?
Express their voice. Once we've done our job of creating awareness, as I said, the groundswell will have to happen. That will only happen first by creating awareness. So at two levels, at the highest level, advocacy is important. At the grassroots level, it's very important that we create awareness. Once awareness is created, people, I'm sure, will, as you said, groundswell is so very important. People will react to that. Over a period of time, opinion will get formed. And when opinion gets formed in the countries, well, the voter is a powerful person in democracies. They make all the difference. Who knows? The next election in countries, they could be because of this one particular issue. These are things that will have to be taken up at that level. So it will only happen first by creating awareness and at the same time creating advocacy at the highest level. To me, it's a two-pronged approach, and then I'm sure things will move.
Thank you. Vice President Carbonnier, what do you think? What can ordinary citizens do to support this effort?
I would like first to echo what Shekhar Mehta just said, awareness. I think that an event like the one today is crucial because it really contributes to get all of us informed, and we can then in turn inform our peers about the risks that are really very serious and the consequences of nuclear weapon use, and the importance, but also the feasibility of nuclear disarmament. And that's where I want to echo what also Izumi Nakamitsu was saying about practical and realistic measures. And I would just like to remind us that in the laws of war, international humanitarian law, they has been built in conversation with the militaries. These were not just dreamers wanting to have laws that would regulate war in the void. It was really a conversation between what are the dictates of military necessity and security on the one hand, and the imperative of humanity on another, and how to strike a proper balance. And I think that we have made great stride, but as Izumi was saying, it takes time. For some very important convention, like the Convention of the Protocol to Prohibit Chemical and Biological Weapons, it took 50 years for some of the major players to join. And I think this is through advocacy, awareness raising. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of ordinary citizens' engagement, because we have seen that it is through that engagement that the prevailing narrative of nuclear weapon has really shifted from a political to a human-centered debate. And I think this really contributed to the adoption and to the entry into force of the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So I think, frankly, nuclear weapons are a common threat to our shared humanity. And when trying to strike a balance, I think the elimination of nuclear weapons as a long-term goal is our common responsibility, and every citizen has a right but an interest in mobilizing in this direction.
Thank you, I completely agree. And Izumi, what do you feel ordinary citizens can do to support this effort?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo both President Mehta and Vice President Carbonnier, but especially for young people, I want to send my message. I mean, these are not necessarily an easy issue. So let's, start with getting an interest, study, discuss amongst your friends, in your classrooms, in your friends groups and clubs, etc. And form your own opinion and think about what you can actually do as a young person in the world. And you can see how young people's movements have really started to influence the course of events in the climate change issues. The same can be done, and it should be done, on the other existential threats, nuclear weapons danger. But the first step for younger people is to get an interest and study. And here at the UN, we take a very important interest in the educational materials and learning opportunities, especially for younger people, so that they can be properly empowered, equipped with the knowledge and the skills, and have opportunities also to network amongst themselves, and themselves actually becoming an important actor in the international scene and the national scene, so that their voices will be reaching those important platforms, including at the national political scenes, but also at the international, some of those platforms that I've pointed out. So, let's start from there. Let's have conversations. Let's follow, social media, and then, register on this kind of a webinar. And that will provide you with an important opportunity for you to actually start taking your first step.
Thank you so much, Izumi. And what a wonderful note to finish on. I think we really have had a really wide-ranging discussion, but it has focused the mind and focused the heart. And I hope that as we've deliberated on the state of play, the urgent priority that nuclear abolition presents, that we have done so in a way that is respectful and honoring of the witness of nuclear survivors from Hiroshima, from Nagasaki, and also all of those test survivors from around the world. So many of them indigenous people on whose land nuclear violence was enacted. I'm grateful to each of you for your time and your energy and your efforts, not only today with us here, but every day in the work that you do to inspire and promote a more peaceful world. And I look forward to eliminating nuclear weapons with you as we go forward. Thank you all for being with us here today. And please go in peace today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
all
you
for being
indeed.
here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.